Everybody, welcome back to Burn It Down with Kim Brown. We're doing a very special Haitian Independence Day episode of Burn It Down because I think it's so important, like I said earlier, that people, especially Black Americans, are familiar with true stories of Black liberation that have happened around the world over the course of history. Now, after the Haitian independence was achieved, there was a relationship formed between Haiti and Black Americans who are still enslaved in the United States. And the extent of how these bonds related to one another is actually quite fascinating. And to share with us more knowledge and more insight about that, we're joined today with Professor Brandon Bird. He is a professor of history at Vanderbilt University, and he's also the author of the book titled The Black Republic, African Americans and the Fate of Haiti. It was published this year in 2020, well, last year, and this is January 1st. So Professor Bird, we appreciate you making some time today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, you know, there was no Black Twitter post Civil War. And a lot of people are really curious about how these bonds across the diaspora were actually formed. So take us to where your book begins and how what happened in Haiti had some influence on Black Americans who were still living in bondage in the United States.
Right. Yeah. So you're absolutely correct that a lot of the technologies that facilitate international communication and international solidarity today, obviously those did not exist, right? So in many ways, they're using other technology, other forms of communication, right? So just to backtrack a bit, to your point, Haiti, the Haitian Revolution, post-independence Haiti is well known to Black Americans. And those are both enslaved and free Black Americans in the first half of the 19th century. How do they know about Haiti and the Haitian Revolution? They know about it through Black sailors that are going between ports in Haiti and ports in the United States, Baltimore, Charleston, et cetera. They know about it through the press. Various U.S. newspapers, including some of the earliest Black newspapers, are sharing information about first the Haitian Revolution, then post-independence Haiti. They know about it through gossip networks, through networks of, really informal news, right? Passed through word of mouth. A quote that I really love that is sort of go-to quote for me to understand these things. Booker T. Washington would say, he says this in his biography of Frederick Douglass, that every enslaved person, even those who had never been beyond the boundaries of their own plantation, knew of Haiti and the Haitian Revolution. So again, how does that happen? Just through these various ways of sharing information by enslaved and free African Americans. And also to your point, of course, then that creates a sort of a heritage, if you will, where Black Americans across generations will then know about Haiti and the Haitian Revolution. Those persist into the period after the U.S. Civil War. And then those links are sort of then perpetuated through new forms of information sharing, through a more expansive Black press, through early Black publishing, books, authors like William Wells Brown, who are then writing about Haiti. So it's really just expansive networks, ways of knowing about what Black people are doing in other parts of the world.
So what influence did this news have on the abolition movement in the United States? And conversely, I would imagine that slave owners and those interested in maintaining the institution of slavery were not enthusiastic to hear, to know that Black people defeated a colonialist power and obtained their liberty. So talk to us about that.
Absolutely. It is always in the interest of the enslaver, of the oppressor, to limit the amount of information and knowledge that the enslaved and the oppressed have. It is certainly in their interest to limit the amount of information that the enslaved and the oppressed have about other enslaved and oppressed people who have thrown off the yokes of their bondage, right? So what effects does it have when the enslaved and oppressed do find out about it, unsurprisingly, it's inspirational, right? That certainly for enslaved people, that news of a victory over slavery, a victory over colonialism, has great meaning. You know, some of the most famous evidence of that, the most iconic evidence of that, are in insurrections and attempted insurrections in the U.S., right? Denmark Vesey in Charleston, who is writing to Haitian leaders, who has a plan for after a successful, what he envisions as a successful insurrection of enslaved people in Charleston, that those successful insurrectionists will then migrate to Haiti, what at that point by the 1820s is a free, independent Black state. So it's absolutely, it's inspirational. It's proof that, first, it is proof of the illegitimacy of slavery, right? Something that enslaved people know deep down in their bones. The Haitian Revolution and the establishment of Haitian independence is proof that illegitimate slavery can be defeated. It is proof that Black people can achieve self-determination and freedom after emancipation. It is proof of the capabilities of Black people afterwards, right? Enslaved people, they know that not only do Haitians overthrow slavery, but they establish a progressive nation state afterwards, right? So all of that is just, it's hard to overstate the impact. Now, to your other point, Kim, about the effect on the abolitionist movement, amongst both white and Black abolitionists, there's constant debate about the role of violence in the abolitionist cause. And this is something that the historian Kelly Carter Jackson writes really eloquently about. So there's constant debate about the role of violence. For those definitely by the eve of the U.S. Civil War who come to understand violence and insurrection as being righteous, as having clear political purpose, the Haitian Revolution, Haiti, that's Exhibit 1A, right? For those that say violence is absolutely necessary, right, for overthrowing slavery, particularly as slaveholders become even more violent and even more obstinate in refusing freedom to the enslaved, right? As slavery expands in the U.S., for those who say violence is necessary, and they say, look at Haiti, right? That's proof.
So even after the Civil War has been fought and won by the Union, of course, we know that conditions largely did not improve for formerly enslaved people who were still living in the South. And pre-Civil War, you know, we all know the heroic tales of Harriet Tubman taking enslaved people north to freedom. But I'm curious, you know, even after the Civil War, was there any efforts for formerly enslaved Black Americans to travel south to Haiti, to a free Black nation that was not experiencing the horrible repercussions of Reconstruction after Reconstruction was over?
Right. Yeah. So it's a great question. So first, there's massive U.S. Black migration to Haiti in the decades before the U.S. Civil War. Thousands and thousands go there. And I think we've underestimated the amount that don't return to the U.S., that continue to live their lives in freedom in Haiti. Now, after the U.S. Civil War, there's some complexity, right? So there is not as much sustained. I found no evidence of mass migration after the U.S. Civil War of U.S. Black Americans to Haiti. And that's for a number of reasons. For one, in the earlier period, the Haitian state had supported U.S. Black immigration, that they had given thousands of dollars to support that. There was developed infrastructure to help make that happen. Conversely, after the U.S. Civil War, the Haitian state does not offer that infrastructure to facilitate immigration. With that said, though, there is strong evidence that there's constant appeal of migration to Haiti, and not just Haiti, but also to other Black states and other even colonies with majority Black populations throughout the world. So this is U.S. Black Americans envisioning immigration not just to Haiti, but also to places like Liberia. And that happens for exactly the reasons that you know, Kim. It's that after the sort of moment of promise during radical Reconstruction, during the years immediately following the U.S. Civil War, where you have Black folks first, gaining formal citizenship rights, Black males gaining voting rights, where you have the formal abolition of slavery, where you have Black males entering state legislators, entering Congress, right? After that sort of fleeting moment, and it's a moment where there is very real backlash to that, right? But after that fleeting moment, you very, very quickly have a reversal of those gains. And it's that, it's those reversals, and obviously the rise of convict leasing, the rise of lynching, right? These real despairs that leads to that appeal, that leads to folks saying, should we reconsider? Like, should we? And of course, they still have in their minds that memory of those earlier periods of migration. So they say, should we, resurrect the immigrationist movement? Should we go to Liberia, right? Should we go to Haiti? And there's very prominent people encouraging that continued attraction of immigration. Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, James Theodore Holly, who's actually part of that earlier wave of immigration, who is encouraging U.S. Black Americans to immigrate to Haiti while he's living in Haiti. He becomes a Haitian citizen and he says, come join me.
I'm also curious because post-Civil War, Black Americans allegedly were, had their freedom, even though they were not granted the full rights of citizenship by the federal government and by the state. Were there Haitians coming to the United States, or was it did the U.S. have such a bad reputation for being hostile, volatile, violent, deadly to Black people that Haitians and other Black people living in other parts of the diaspora were avoiding the U.S.? What was that about?
So there are some. There are some Haitians late 19th, early 20th century who do come to the U.S. Some of these are Haitians of the professional political classes. They include folks like some students at Black institutions, including Tuskegee, who have who've already received education in Haiti, who are coming to schools like Tuskegee to receive some additional education, who see it as sort of sort of finishing school of sorts. You have some like a famous, one famous instance is the Haitian intellectual Jean-Priest Mars will come to the U.S., actually to the U.S. South, to actually go to Tuskegee and try to see if that could be a model for education in Haiti. But these are sort of, it's definitely individual examples. There's not waves of migration. And this changes in the early 20th century, and it largely changes due to U.S. imperialism. It's a consequence of U.S. empire and also other European empire. That's sort of the destabilizing effect it has on the African diaspora, of the destabilizing effect it has on the Caribbean. All these things lead to migration to other parts of the world, including to the U.S., right? So the destabilizing effect that U.S. empire has on Haiti will lead to growing Haitian immigration to places like Cuba in the early 20th century. And some of that migration will also lead to Haitians coming to Harlem, for example. So it's really, and of course, the U.S. occupation is the most destabilized, has the largest destabilizing effect on Haiti. And that's really where you start seeing larger currents of migration from Haiti and also from the larger Caribbean to the United States, to places like New York.
So in present times, we can see the devastating effects that sanctions imposed by the United States and its other European imperialist powers have on nations like Venezuela and Iran.
Mm-hmm.
But, you talk to Haitians today, and they'll tell you that the U.S. has been interfering in Haitian affairs for well over 100 years. And Haiti, of course, has been punished by the colonialist powers for obtaining its freedom in the 1800s, been punished really ever since. So what are some of the earliest forms in your research that you found where the U.S. state was punishing the Haitian state in a variety of ways? What did that look like early on?
So there's no doubt that these things are true. There's just no question. In many ways, we have to think of Haiti and also the island of Hispaniola, think of Haiti and both the Dominican Republic as sort of labs for U.S. empire in the Caribbean. So Haiti, of course, had, after it achieves independence, it doesn't stop being a target of colonial fantasies, imperial fantasies, and colonial imperial structures, right? The famous case of the indemnity in 1825, where basically France says, in order for diplomatic recognition, Haitians have to pay the equivalents of billions and billions and billions of dollars today, which Haiti then is paying off, and also paying off the debts of the loans they take to pay off the indemnity well into the 20th century, right? So there's other, after 1804, Haiti continues to be a target of colonial imperial aggressions. Now, by the late 19th century, the U.S. is trying to position itself as the colonial imperial power who will have the leading stake and the leading role in dictating Haitian economic and political life. And this is before that 1898 moment. So a lot of times, the history of U.S. imperialism sort of begins in 1898, the Spanish-American War. But well before that, so in the period of Reconstruction, Ulysses S. Grant is trying to annex the Dominican Republic. And as he's trying to annex the Dominican Republic, he's doing it with the idea that Haiti would be next. And that's with the idea that those countries could be, first of all, they had very, very good places, strategic locations for coaling stations. They had deep and capacious harbors to house a growing naval fleet. They had obviously large Black populations, majority Black populations. So the idea was that it could be a place to export the quote unquote Negro problem, to send free African Americans there. So there's a very real desire to bring these countries into the orbit of the U.S., whether as parts of the U.S. or as protectorates or as colonies of the U.S., right? And again, this is well before 1898. And that's a constant up until the U.S. occupation in 1915. And by 1915, that occupation comes about due to the strengthening grip that the U.S. has on Haiti's political and economic life. By that time, the Citibank, what becomes the Citibank of New York, has a majority stake in the National Bank of Haiti. By that time, the U.S. State Department, the U.S. Navy, they have the idea that if the U.S. doesn't take control of Haiti from a strategic and military standpoint, then Germany would. So all of these forces come together, right? Capital, empire, military interests, they come together in, really making the U.S. take aims at Haiti, to put it in the crosshairs of its empire. And of course, after the occupation, which lasts until 1934, the U.S. doesn't stop. Right, it's a long shadow of occupation. To use the words of, name your Haitian intellectual, Haitian activists. Right, they know it, and they're absolutely correct in naming this continued aggression that continues today.
Wow. I mean, this is just an amazing trove of information that I absolutely did not know. I'm sure a lot of people watching also did not know. And I don't want you to give away everything, because I want people to go and buy your book and learn for themselves. But, before we go, I wanted to ask, given everything that you've studied and what you learned and what you researched, applying that knowledge to where we are in the 21st century, why do you think there is still so much imperial interest in Haiti's fate and so much meddling in Haiti's affairs currently? Obviously, these things go back now hundreds of years, but why now? Why does the U.S. still want to diddle with Haiti? Why does France still want to diddle with Haiti? Why does the United Nations? We know about that horrible cholera outbreak that was initiated by UN workers some time ago after the devastating earthquake. Why now? Like, why are they still bothering Haiti? How come Haiti just can't be?
Right. Because the colonial enterprise continues to be lucrative. Right. If at its heart, this colonial imperial enterprise is about assuring markets for U.S. or European goods, for assuring guaranteed sources of resources, then for U.S. or European consumers, for assuring basically a relationship between a dominant state and a client state. If all of these things remain at the heart of the colonial imperial enterprise, well then it continues to be in the interest of U.S. and European elites to have Haiti in this subjugated relationship, right? What changes really is just sort of the nature of the goods being exchanged or extracted. What changes is the nature of the exact capitalist business enterprise that is demanding that stake in the dominance and subjugation of Haiti, right? And that's sort of vague. So what, to put a name on it, what in the 20th century becomes Major League Baseball's interest in having, control over factories where Haitians are paid pennies to produce all the baseballs used in the major leagues. That's in the 20th century. Prior to that, in the late 19th, it's the steamship operator who is working with the State Department to make sure that they literally put in place a Haitian government through a coup that is going to assure a monopoly for that steamship company for the exchange of goods between Haiti and the U.S. Right, and so the parts may change from era to era, but the interests, the greed, the capitalist interests, sort of the racial prejudice that underlies that colonial relationship, that's fundamental to it. And those things, Kim, to your point, haven't changed in the 21st century, right? When you look at thing, and it's a heartbreaking situation right now for the Haitian people, and by the Haitian people, right, who are being, who the Haitian government, Moise has basically his heel on their neck right now. And you look at, who is he accountable to? Why does he have his boot on the neck of the Haitian people, right? He's accountable to the Canadian government, to the U.S. government, to the UN, right? And why is that? It's the fundamental relationship, right? The place that the colonial imperial powers have put them in vis-a-vis the Haitian government, and then how that affects the relationship between the Haitian state and the Haitian people.
Incredible. What? The United States was meddling in other people's elections, facilitating coups? Unheard of.
For 200 years.
That's right. That's why I have to laugh when people get upset about the meddling in our elections. It's like, even if that is the case, I think we've earned it because we've been doing this to other countries for centuries now. So just amazing information, Brandon. We appreciate you making time to share this knowledge with us. And listen, everybody, go get the book. It's titled The Black Republic, African Americans and the Fate of Haiti. We've been speaking with its author, Professor Brandon Bird, who teaches history at Vanderbilt University. Brandon, thank you. Thank you so much for making time for us today on this Haitian Independence Day. I hope that this sets a good tone. We've had a very difficult 2020. The Black American struggle in itself has been difficult, but we need to also look beyond our own borders and see how these relationships and a lot of times our outcomes are really tied to the dominance of the European and American empire trying to keep us subjugated, as you said. So thank you so much for talking with us today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Everybody, I hope you learned something on Burn It Down today, January 1st, 2021. I want everyone to please have a happy new year, celebrate Haitian independence, get you a bowl of soup jumu if you're able to. And I appreciate y'all checking us out on Burn It Down. Don't forget to go to the Burn It Down with Kim Brown YouTube channel and hit subscribe. Have a happy new year, y'all. See you later. Bye-bye.